say good night, world, good night to Tobago, good night. Welcome to a production of Tobago Civil Net, Town Hall conversation on people's participation, imperative for good governance. Today is Thursday, the 18th of November, 2021. We welcome you, and let me say that Tobago Civil Net is a non-political organization that is designed for the primary purpose of building the consciousness of Tobagonians and keeping them alive to their social responsibility to ensure good governance in the island of Tobago. Non-political, non-affiliated, non-attached. We have tonight to discuss this most important topic with us. On my right on my screen, I have Dr. Alvin Thompson. He is a doctoral fellow in environmental governance, operating out of Canada, Tobagonian by birth, Delaford by geographical reference. We have next to Dr. Thompson, we have Dr. Remy, Dylan Remy, medical doctor, independent senator, social activist in the Tobago space. Next to Dr. Remy, we have Brittany Romeo, foreign language educator. And the final panelist for tonight's discussion, we have hailing out of Belgarden, Tobago, the political activist, well known by the name of Anthony James. Welcome, and thank you for accepting the invitation to participate in this most important discussion. And we are going to discuss tonight the issue of people's participation and imperative for good governance. I will start with you, Brother Anthony, and I will want you to give your opening comments on the topic. How do you see people's participation and its impact on good governance?
Well, good night, fellow panelists, and good night to good night to all who are tuned in. There has to be a presumption of government or the people in order to participate, that the people are free, and the institutions or the institution in which they operate and relate to as government is free. So I preface my statement because we are in a context here in Tobago where Tobagonians, one would categorically and undoubtedly say we are not free. And in fact, the institution of government in Tobago is not free. And therefore, the people of Tobago aren't free. So that good governance and responsible participation hinge on that freedom. But let's suppose you have that freedom, and even in the context where the institution is not free, it is not free, and the people of Tobago aren't free, we know that. But in the general sense of things, I conceive or construe government as emanating from the bottom up. And I mean to say from the streets to the villages, to the communities, to the region, and then to the nation as a whole. So you're talking about,
you know what? Take it right.
Yeah. So you're talking about representation, participation, or involvement from the streets to the villages, to the communities, to the region, to the nation. So I'm talking about a structure there which includes local into the national. And so in that sense, to have villages or streets, communities complaining because they will be all involved in the decision making and bringing information with respect to their needs of representation. They will be bringing that, because indeed you can't start from the center, you can't construct from the center and operate from the structure, which is what from the center, which is what now exists. That system or that ideology or philosophy is doomed to fail, because you will hello?
So you are advocating not for representative participation, but direct participation by the streets up to the community, up to the national level.
Yes, I would like to
get you on that. Well, let me get Brittany's take. Brittany, are you available at this point?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me properly?
I'm hearing you clearly, Brittany.
Okay, lovely. So good evening, fellow panelists, organizers, viewers. When I think about people participation, I think about what is our contribution? What is our collective responsibility as an island, before I even say country, but more so as Tobagonians? How do we get involved, and how are we going to chart the uncharted waters forward in ensuring that the development of every single Tobagonian is heard and every single Tobagonian has that opportunity to develop themselves?
Short and sweet, Brittany. So that's your take on people's participation. So it has to do about the genesis coming from the people themselves, generating that environment in terms of their own participation and contribution to government. Dr. Thompson, could we have your take on what is good governance and people's participation in good governance? So we'll take a presentation from Brother Thompson.
Good night again. So good night to the panel, and good night to my Tobagonian brothers and sisters. I'm a researcher by trade, so I like to do presentations. I don't claim any originality in these ideas. I'm borrowing them to merely frame how I intend to present my piece tonight. So second slide. So to start, I want to start with a very key assumption and a definition. I borrow my definition from the field of environmental governance because that is my leaning. So one of the key assumptions we make for participation in governance is that governance is not a natural prerogative of government. Sometimes when we think of government and governance, we think that this belongs to people in the parliament, and that we as citizens are sometimes bystanders, and even if we are allowed to participate, then we participate at the behest of those who govern. So we start with that basic assumption. All right, and I found this definition very handy for my own presentation, that governance is the whole of public as well as private interactions taken to solve societal problems and create societal opportunities. It includes the formulation and application of principles guiding those interactions and the care for institutions that enable them being enabling those interactions. This is a classic definition, and I think any A-level student, any student in secondary school can read it. All right, and then it gives us a basis for having a discussion about governance, and particularly participatory governance. Next slide, please. Okay, so Einstein is a famous American researcher in governance, and she wrote a paper back in 1969 called The Ladder of Participation. Incidentally, when I went online tonight to get some reference from it, it has 25,000 references, 25,000. And Stein has this ladder, which has 8 rungs. You know what a ladder is, all right? You start at the very bottom, and she moves upward from manipulation to therapy to informing to consultation, placation, partnership, delegated power, and citizen control. And then she breaks it down into 3 categories. At the very bottom of the ladder, she calls non-participation, because really you are not allowed to engage those whom you have elected to govern in any significant way. She calls that non-participation. In the middle of the ladder, she says that there is a degree of tokenism. So you feel placation, you feel as though you are part of the process. So they invite you to a town meeting, you know, and you are allowed to give your views and so on. But those views do not become a part of the policy-making process. So she calls that tokenism. Consultation incidentally falls into that category, all right? And at the very top, and this is what I want us to focus on, is what Stein calls a degree of citizen power. Meaning that this for Stein is really meaningful participation, where power and decision-making authority are transferred, and resources rather, are transferred from those who we elect to govern to those who are allowed to participate in governance. So Stein calls this citizen power. My next slide. So those last 3 rungs of the ladder, which she describes as citizen power, all right, it's partnership, and I'm reading from the bottom up. It's partnership, delegated power, and citizen control. All right. For partnership, Stein says that power is redistributed through negotiation between citizens and power holders. Power holders here being those whom we elect, people like Dr. Remy. And they are agreed to share planning and decision-making responsibility. Very important. They agree to share planning and decision-making responsibilities through structures such as joint policy boards, planning committees, and mechanisms for resolving impasses. At the 7th level of the ladder, Stein calls that delegated power. So where there are negotiations between citizens and public officials that result in those citizens achieving dominant decision-making authority over a particular plan or particular program. All right, note decision-making authority. All right. And lastly, at the very top of the rung of the ladder is what Stein calls citizen control. Here, there are guarantees that citizens will be allowed to participate, all right, to govern programs and institutions, to be in full charge of policy and managerial aspects, and be able to negotiate the conditions under which outsiders may change those. Now, before I stop answering, I hope I'm not overshooting my time.
Yeah.
I just want to give a good example of which I think falls into the category of delegated power. And I want to give a Tobago example. In 2005, and again in 2010, there was significant coral bleaching of Buku Reef. All right. At that time, the government of Trinidad and Tobago secured a loan from the Global Environmental Fund to do some research on what was causing the coral bleaching. We knew it was in part rising sea surface temperatures, but there were some inland activities as well that were contributing to degradation. So the government of Trinidad and Tobago secured funding from the Global Environmental Fund. All right. However, the project was in Tobago. So the government felt it the proper thing to do to engage the Tobago House of Assembly. And by a memorandum of understanding, those funds and the responsibility and the funds were transferred to the Tobago House of Assembly. The Tobago House of Assembly does not have the research capacity to do this kind of work, and therefore the THA, by again a MOU, transferred the responsibility and the funds to the Buku Reef Trust. All right, and the Buku Reef Trust undertook this project. It was about a 5-year project. I think they engaged in the University of West Indies. They hired their own specialists and so on. And at the end of that project, the Buku Reef Trust actually received a commendation from the Global Environmental Fund in the way the project was executed. I think that that is a classic example where citizens are allowed to participate in the way that Steins framed this, where both resources and decision-making authority is transferred from those who we elect to govern to those who are supposed to be the governed.
But what do we need in this model for it to be effective and relevant? Do we need a legal framework? I leave you with that for your contemplation as I go to Dr. Remy for opening statement. Dr. Remy, you have to unmute, please.
Good night. You hearing me now?
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Good night. And I just want to thank CivilNet for allowing me the privilege of being here tonight on this very important topic. And I just want to start by saying this area of governance is important to me. So I would start with governance first, and then look at the role of citizens' participation in governance. So I was looking up also area definitions of governance, and there are many. But I looked at the concept of governance from UNESCO, an article that defined governance as referring to structures and processes that are designed to ensure accountability, transparency, and responsiveness, rule of law, stability, equity, and inclusiveness, empowerment, and broad-based participation. Governance also represents the norms, values, and rules of the game through which public affairs are managed in a manner that is transparent, participatory, inclusive, and responsive. So on that, from that, in that light, I'm looking at the participation here in that context. So in order to have good governance, the participation of the people in the process is important. We have a system here where people participate during the time of an election. They listen to what the people have to say or not listen, and they go and vote. And at the end of that, for the most part, after that, there's not much active participation of persons in the governance arrangement. So the concept here of good governance and the concept of people participating is important. And therefore, in that context, I put our participation as people as very important. And I'll just put one other area. It is from an article from the Chandler Institute of Good Governance, Chandler Government Institute. They actually had an opening of a Good Governance Index, which was launched in April of this year. And I just noted that one of the things that they said, actually two areas that are important in terms of good governance, one having strong community and community involvement, and the other is vibrant economies. I just put that there because a strong community in terms of community involvement, community participation is there, and then vibrant economies as important in terms of that model of good governance. So I will end there and say that I think it's an important area for us.
Thank you, Dr. Remy. So as we move forward, in the context of Tobago, what form of governance do we operating in a constitutional construct that promotes representative democracy, and therefore it is assumed by that arrangement that our participation is through our representative, and that has been the situation that we have seen over the years, where we are not directly involved in the decision-making process, but after the vote, our representative goes off and do the bidding on our part without any formal framework for consultation and to bring us back into the decision-making process. What form of government would you think that Tobago will need to treat with that reality and to improve the participation of Tobagonians in the governance process so that we can move the needle closer to an experience where we have good governance? Anthony?
Well, we consider what Tobago needs, and we can discuss what Tobago needs. We can philosophize about it. We can theorize about it. But as a matter of fact, after the election of January 25th, Tobago found itself or herself in a position, and Tobago could not resolve its own situation. So it tells you that of a lack of sovereignty and truly a lack of citizenship, right? Because this hits at the heart of our status as citizens in our own land. But we couldn't solve that. In fact, that had to go, well, not had to, but we see the parliament in Trinidad taking control or responsibility for that. So as I said, we can theorize, we can philosophize, but Tobago lack the automaticity to do for Tobago what only Tobagonians can do for Tobago and must do for Tobago. So here it is we are discussing, and all the panelists I think are in agreement. We are in agreement with each other tonight. We are really speaking of an all-inclusive style of government where nobody is left out. I think that's the general theme that is coming across. And I think we would agree on that. But how do we get to the point where we can arrange our own system of government for ourselves? And I will submit, and the others can come in. But first of all, there has to be a change. There has to be reform. There has to be constitutional reform such that the Tobagonian is sovereign to do the things that we want to do there. We should not be, for our own life story, applying to another entity to tell us or give us permission to fix our own life stories. I want to say, Dr. Anselm, is that we must be the subject in our own sentence, in our own paragraphs, in our own essays, in our own thoughts. We must be the subjects at the beginning of the sentence and not really an object in the sentence.
So your fundamental point is that the current constitutional construct prevents Tobago, even Tobago, from participating in issues that affects its development and its people. So we move to Brittany. Brittany, what form of government or what transformative activities or constitutional reform that we need to create an environment where we can have genuine and effective people's participation? We have heard Brother Anthony. So
so while listening to him, he does raise some very interesting points. However, I am very concerned by the fact that Tobago definitely needs reform, but it needs it in the sense that it has to be a holistic approach. And even in the sense that we as a society, we need to have more participation in the process. Because I know, of course, that we had the elections back in January and it did not go how we thought it would. Nobody knew it would go that way. But it makes me wonder, and I think that from the ground, a lot of persons had a lot of conversations about it. We had so many different panels and discussions and even articles wondering what would be the next best step for Tobago? How can we solve this? What can be approached? And we realized that there were a lot of different areas that we never even thought about. So I do agree that reform is needed and we need to continue to have these type of discussions on it. And you'd realize that even in the sense of the Constitution, it's a living document. So it should be amended accordingly when certain circumstances come up, rather than just thinking it's never going to happen. So I think this needs active participation and not necessarily thinking that you can do it on the side, but you need to be mindful that if you want to see a Tobago that thrives, we need to participate in it. That's my thoughts on it now as we continue the discussion, but I will add more later on. I think you're muted.
Do you think that the Tobago society is sufficiently organized and alive in terms of its consciousness and its responsibility? And when I talk about this society, I'm not talking about government institution, I'm talking about the holistic society. Are we alive consciously about our roles and responsibility in terms of effecting and impacting good governance? So reflect on that And I'll go to Brother Alvin.
So Anselm, what are the key issues we have to keep at the front of this discussion is that governance is about decision-making authority. And I think my opening salvo, that's the point I was trying to get across. When Einstein gives you that ladder, she's saying that participation is not a homogeneous thing. And there are many ladders to participation. And the question that we have to answer really is at what level we want to participate. So when a politician comes to a community center and engages you in a discussion, of course you are participating. But the question is that meaningful participation? Does it lead to anything? If you do not have authority to make decisions, then you can't effect change. So if I do not share anything else with my audience tonight, I want to share that government is about making decisions, and to make decisions, you need to have power. And if you don't have power, you can't influence anything. All right, we had a process recently, I think that's the point that Anthony is making. We had a process where Tobagonians expressed their wishes. They sent those wishes down to the parliament, and the parliament decided to do what they want because the parliament has authority to make decisions. That is what government is for. All right, so if you are satisfied that you are okay with sitting in a community center or coming on CivilNet and having a fancy discussion about ideas and so on, then you can do that. But we must know that the reason why what we are talking about here gets nothing done or takes a very long time to get anything done is because we do not have the authority to make decisions. All right, that's the fundamental point.
And that's why I asked you and I left with you the idea that this requires a certain legislative or legal framework where authorities are assigned to different components of the society in the decision-making process.
Exactly.
And it goes back to the fundamental point that Anthony has been making, that we need to have, and Brittany also, that we need to have a broad-based consultative issue that leads to significant changes in the constitutional construct of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. We move to Dr. Remy, and Dr. Remy, could you comment on what on the issue of Tobago's and the form of government and governance and Tobago participation, and whether the current constitutional construct affords Tobagonians that opportunity to have meaningful participation in matters that affects them on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, so in terms of Tobago's relationship, the governance in Tobago House of Assembly and the people of Tobago, that's one area. Then there's Tobago House of Assembly and the national government, Trinidad and Tobago, the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. So in the case of Tobago's participation, as far as the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago is concerned, Tobago House of Assembly making decisions for Tobago in relation of the construct of Trinidad and Tobago, there is need for change. I'm agreeing with that. What happens in the terms of Tobago and the involvement? In other words, you had the 1266 relationship in January. People were saying stuff. They wanted things to happen in a certain way, but there was no way that they could have been influencing the persons you've already elected. At the end of the day, they had the say and they did what they wanted. Could you have had some mechanism in which you went back to the people formally in major situations like that, so that the people say, I don't think the people necessarily have to be involved on every day-to-day, because that's what you elect the people there for. They can't be coming back to the people on a day-to-day basis to know what to do. So they have to govern. But in critical areas, I think you need to have the people's involvement. And I am putting it at that level of, in terms of governance, Tobago, how Tobago is governed. The people should be involved in major decision-making, and a system for having that, for formalizing that, I'm in agreement with that. However, whatever happens has to happen at the level in a non-partisan way. When I say that, I mean that, for instance, what happens right now? People, they are represented by their parties, And a lot of the times, people only listen in governance to the people of their party and not necessarily to everyone. Once you are governing, you are supposed to govern the whole island or the whole nation in the case of Trinidad and Tobago. You can't be governing just for your tribe. So I'm saying that there, in critical areas, you must have the opportunities for, in critical decision making, you must have the opportunity for people at every level to be able to put their voice in. But I don't think necessarily on a daily basis.
We have a question from Facebook because we are streaming live, and I just want to share this with the panelists and probably get their response. What is the role of effective institution in addressing the bread and butter concerns of residents to allow them the freedom to be involved in vigilant accountability in Tobago? Any take on that? But Anthony?
Question?
So
the role of institutions?
What is the role of effective institution in addressing the bread and butter concerns of residents to allow them the freedom to be involved in vigilant accountability? So what the person is really asking, and probably I may take the opportunity to summarize that, probably it is the role of accountability in good governance and the role of institution like CivilNet. Because if we are talking participation, I am thinking that we need a more effective citizenry that is more informed and organized, and probably we can tie into that question the role of civil society and the private sector in impacting the behavior of governance, of government in the whole context or the framework of governance. Right, Anthony?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure I've got what the questionnaire, what the questioner is really because I sense that he's referring to effective governance, accountability, and the role of such an apparatus, if it exists at all, to hold the government accountable so that the government is bound to represent in a way that the person who's asking the question is seeking or demanding. But I don't think that exists at this point in time. It doesn't exist. The most we can do or to cause that to happen is a heightened consciousness where people are, those who are in office feel as though their job is at stake, so that they are now bound to act responsibly. The culture that exists is that, as you have said, that Dr. Remy said at the beginning, after you have voted for them, they go back into the office, especially if they believe that the opposition is weak and they can come around at election time with good slogans, nice songs, bribe the electorate, close the election to the election, then they do what they want. So to answer the question in the context where we don't have the systems in place, the thing that is really needed there really is really the consciousness of the people to, and then at the same time, we have to organize alternatives. If there is no alternative, meaningful, viable alternative to the incumbent, then we will not succeed.
Anselm, the question of civil society in terms of making sure that the governance or that the government governs in an accountable way, I think is key. And yes. I would commend CivilNet as one of the organizations. I know someone put that in the chat just now, whether CivilNet is not trying to do in order to get people involvement at a non-partisan level, to get people involvement. So I'm in agreement that there is need for institutions like civil society to be important in assessing or important in making sure that we have the framework. Being able to question. The thing about it is that a lot of what happens right now is that you question, it goes into the media, goes into social media, becomes bacchanal. People think that that they are being attacked because you don't seem to think in the same way that they are thinking. So we have to get a level of maturity that says, I have to be able to listen to people who are interested in the development of the nation, and not just because I say something that's different from you in whichever area you're in, that you are not being meaningful. And I'm agreeing that these institutions are important in terms of transparency and accountability.
Okay, thank you.
In seeking to get it.
Okay, so we need to have more organized and robust organization, both in the private and civil society areas that are prepared and capable of impacting the conduct of government. So Alvin, what's your take on this?
So Anselm, when I elect my assemblyman, I am in no way telling him that I want to transfer all the power I have to him or her. All right, my assemblyman thinks I want to transfer my power, and that is why he behaves in the way he behaves. But I don't want to transfer my power to my assemblyman or my senator or my MP. I want to retain some for myself. That's the fundamental prerogative of participation. Participation is not about discussing fancy ideas in a community center or online forum. Participation is about the people retaining some of the power to make decisions about their business. That's what the gentleman is talking about, institutions.
Right. So
we in government assume that the institutions that must make decisions about our lives are those in parliament. And I'm saying, no, that's what Einstein is saying. You have to build out an institutional framework which gives power to the people who elect those to govern. Right. It's the fundamental point.
So stick up in there, Brother Alvin. So we have had over the life of the Republic a constitution and a society that was foundation on this quote unquote representative democracy. And if you go through the literature, you will see that that is where you have in the main, the participation of the citizenry is really indirect to their representative. And it's in that context, representative assume that when they are elected, they are empowered to make all the decisions on all the persons they represent. And there is no need for them to come back to the community center if they wish not to come back to have any conversation, because you have vested every iota of responsibility and power in your elected representative to go to the parliament and to make all the legislative decisions and to make all the policy decisions. So in that context, if we are moving to a purer system of genuine participation of citizens in the governance process, it means therefore we have to reconstruct the whole society, starting from the foundation law, which is the constitution.
Yeah, but I want to make one point before you move on. So in governance, there's something that we refer to as polycentricity, meaning government having many decision-making centers. So let's think about Trinidad and Tobago in that context. So we have a parliament, which is, we could say, is the supreme seat of power. All right, but we also have a Tobago Assembly. Some people refer to the Tobago Assembly as a subnational level of government. Some people say it's a quasi-national level of government. We have municipal corporations. All right, we have parastatals, the HDC, the Port Authority. They make decisions also. So I think when we think of governance, we must at the same time try to delink ourselves from making a connection between governance and government.
Yes.
Right. So when we're talking about governance, we are talking about ways that we make decisions and the centers that make those decisions. And I'm saying that in a new governance model, we ought to think about governance as having several centers of power. And that's why I made the point that I don't want to transfer all my power to my representative parliament. You're an economist by training.
Yeah.
Right? What makes a parliamentarian think that he has a better grasp of economic issues than you?
Well, once you elect them, they become let us leave it at that. Brittany, what's your take on that? And we have a
So-
question coming in from Facebook again, so we'll take that after Brittany's.
Yes, and I actually see some comments in the chat as well. But I
Yes.
would wonder about where do we lose our voice? Because after when we elect these officials to represent us, don't we hold them accountable? Can't we still have conversations with them and say, hey, this is not what I wanted? Is that we lose our voice at that stage and so they are responsible for doing everything after? I'm trying to understand that connection, because even in the definition that we would have seen at the beginning of this panel, we highlighted that accountability is a critical tenet. So what happens?
Well, we hold them accountable after 4 years, but
Okay.
you because that's the only time you get an opportunity. A fair opportunity
Or
to
you hold
participate.
them accountable by a lot of old talk.
Oh, because
Right.
the only,
That as
only
well.
fair opportunity we would have had, or we have to participate in our democracy is at the vote, because the political culture has evolved. Is that after the vote you have elected me? Remember, we have had politicians in the parliament say, you have elected us, you have given us a mandate. And once you give
Right,
them a
and we
mandate,
hold them accountable to that mandate so that they ensure.
but you see, within the current construct, there's really no institutional and legal framework for us to hold them seriously accountable within the intervening years of after the election. So you can make all the noise, but we have no process of recalling them. Check about it. What could you do to hold an elected representative accountable if he messed up within the point of him being elected to the next election? What can you do? Except the party decides to terminate his appointment, his or her appointment. There's nothing this citizen can do more than cry and write in the papers and hope that the party will respond. We have seen in this country where ministers and elected representatives would have messed up big time, and the party would have shielded them and protected them when they should have been dismissed. So if we have to build a system that really delivers good governance and effective governance, what kind of system do you envision that we ought to be thinking about to really enhance and create the corridors of opportunity and the institutional framework and the legal and constitutional framework that will guarantee and safeguard in terms of the promotion and protection of the citizens' participation in the development of this country? That is the conversation. I want to move the conversation to that level. Well, let me take the comment from Facebook here. And somebody on Facebook, and we thank Facebook for following us, and this is a production of the Civil Net Society, a non-political organization that is designed with the intent to raise the consciousness of Tobagonians and keep them alive to their social responsibility towards impacting good governance on this island and holding our elected representative and our government institution accountable to the people. So the question coming in from Facebook is saying, how can we help political and other leaders to stop being defensive and tribal when questions about their leadership and their institution performance are raised? How can we help them to have serious discussion and not take things personally? Could we frame that into the question that I would have posed with you all as to how we build a system that lends itself to real meaningful participation, accountability, transparency, the rule of law, a constitutional framework where we can really, after an election, participate meaningfully. And if our elected representatives are not performing to the level we expect them, we can withdraw the gift in terms of our vote from them. Because when we give them with our vote, we have, as Alvin said, we give you with this on the condition that you will behave yourself and you will work in the interest of the people. And if you are misbehaving, I can recall my gift and look to give it to someone else. What kind of system should we be looking to develop in the context of Tobago, which will also impact the constitutional relationship between Trinidad and Tobago? Anthony.
Well, Anselm and the rest of the panel, listening to the conversation, I can't help but think that legal frameworks are limited. We can't depend on constitutional and legal framework to produce good governance as a product. We need people of integrity, in order. That's what I'm getting when we are speaking, because you could have, like for instance, in Trinidad, you have integrity commission, you have all kind of procurement bodies, a lot of things, integrity commission you have, and these politicians are still sidestepping till you have ministers of government recusing themselves and benefiting from the very same thing.
Okay, Anthony, stick up in. When I speak to the issue of legal frameworks, I am speaking in that context where the law will create a mandate for people participation. For instance, let me use the airport project that is now on the way to be. If we have a legal construct in Tobago that says, if you are doing a project in community A, there must be participation of the resident that will be directly and indirectly impacted by this development. And the decision of that community must carry out the final outcome of that project. For instance, I know in some islands, if you are going to do a project, you have to have a community meeting, the project has to be presented, and the community has to vote as to whether they want this project or not. And if they vote no, by law, it cannot be implemented. And I think Antigua Barbuda is one of those countries. So that is my context when I speak to the issue of legal framework, because that is where you'll get the authority to participate and hold people accountable. But that is not to dilute the point you are making about the importance of integrity and honesty in the whole governance arrangement. So go ahead, Anthony.
So I'm saying, I'm agreeing. All the constitutional and legal frameworks that we need to produce the desired outcome is good. You follow what I'm saying? It's good to have those as much. We can stretch the legal and constitutional framework as much as we can. And I'm saying, so I'm allowing for that. But even as we allow for that, and one of the things that is preventing us from having all those constitutional and legal inputs that we need, it is because of the lack of integrity of the society. Trinidad and Tobago at this point in time is base. This is an absolute corrupt and my mind always go back to A.N.R. Robinson, because I think he has been an absolute stalwart and an example for all the citizens of Tobago and Trinidad to follow. Robinson didn't need all those constitutional and legal framework, because what? He was a man of culture, a man of dignity and integrity. I'm saying in all our pursuit, we have to build back those moral and spiritual values as we go along. Simply having constitutional and legal framework in place would not suffice. It won't work. There needs to be a campaign in Tobago, a campaign in Trinidad to bring back moral and spiritual values into our society.
But do you think that if you have greater people's participation with a more organized civil society, that we can, by that process, press out greater accountability and transparency and honesty in our representatives? We have somebody who is participating here. I think it's Shirley Cook. Her hand is
there's a raised hand, yeah.
And we want to take the question from her, get them involved in the discussion.
And so after that, I want to jump into what Anthony just said, because I think it's an important point.
Yes, we'll take you after Dr. Rem. So, Ms. Cook. Hello? Hello? Well, Dr. Remy, go ahead until Ms. Cook.
Acknowledge her, let her know. Shirley, you need to unmute. The hand is still up.
Is she here?
It's away from the call.
Probably she's away. Dr. Ermigo.
Yes, I agree with that point very strongly in terms of the agent that we elect in governance to govern. These agents are key in terms of who they are and what values they have. Not only them, but as a society, we also have to be interested in the terms of values that we have, because the agents don't come out of thin air. The agents come out of the community. So I agree with Anthony, and I would like to see this as one thing. Oh, Shirley says she needs to be unmuted by the host. So I agree that we need a transformation in our Tobago. I'm saying a Tobago space, and I'm saying that in light of the fact that we are going to be getting autonomy at some point in time, hopefully in the near future, where we will be governing ourselves in a more meaningful way. I am putting that on the table and agreeing with Anthony that one of the things we need to do is deal with what do we think important as a people? What values do we hold? Because I agree with him, you could put 10,000 laws, people will find ways to break the laws. And therefore, the laws are needed. So the laws are needed, but the people are the most important in this whole scenario. Making sure that you select people and then hold them accountable. They must have the robust laws and policies, and we also must have strong institutions to deal with them also. I would just stop there.
There, like you have read Lee Kuan Yew, the issue of strong institutions to prevent public sector corruption, and the fact that you must have strong public institutions to prevent corruption and also to hold our elected representative accountable. But the rule of law prevails. That's the gold standard, and you have to have strong institution, meaning the judiciary, law enforcement comes into the picture as part of the governance model. So we have Ms. Cook. She has to be unmuted by the host. Hello? Hello? Well, let us take, is it that Brendan Gray is seeking to ask a question?
Rodney Pigott is.
Okay, well, let us take Rodney. Rodney, are you hearing me? Well, Alvin, let's take you until they can join us.
So, Anselm, I am not here in my contribution tonight suggesting in any way that when I elect my parliamentarian, I want to go into the parliament to influence the way laws are made. All right. What a lot of the work around participatory governance has to do with governance at a community level. All right. A lot of literature around is about community governance. And you and I have had countless discussions about this. To me, I am not so much, I don't want to make recommendations for what happens in Port of Spain. My recommendation is that, and every Tobagonian things like this, is that Tobago needs its autonomy to do its own business, to govern itself. So I'm leaving Port of Spain there. I'm not going there at all. That's too complex, too complicated for me. I'll take us the entire night. I'm coming to Tobago. Right. And what I want to suggest is a model for community participation, real community participation in Tobago that is based on a structure that already exists, the village councils. All right. So in my mind, what I see in a new Tobago government is, and I'm talking about participation here regarding the execution of projects and programs within communities where resources will be transferred from a new Tobago government, call it what you will, a THA or whatever you will be transferred to communities to engage in programs and projects. And so this is my simple model. What you would have in the new Tobago structure, especially, and I'm talking executive here now, is you would have two development regions, Northeast Tobago and Southwest Tobago, all right? And within each of those regions, you will have what I call regional councils. Those regional councils would be staffed by village councils. We already have village councils. So what you are doing is you are amalgamating village councils at a regional level, all right? Because government, at the end of the day, is about executing projects, programs to look after the needs of people. So we have Northeast Tobago Regional Council, Southwest Tobago Regional Councils, and those regional councils are staffed by village councils. Village councils will hold elections to elect members to the village council. This is not about politics here, no one parties. No parties are allowed to get involved at this level. Anthony is from Belgarden, Anthony is from Belgarden, and Anslem is a good boy in Belgarden, and we know he's standing and so on, and he's a decent. Anslem could be nominated to serve on a village council, and you will have nominations from within village councils to serve on a community council. My suggestion is that we have elections for the regional councils in intervening years. So you have what the US call midterm elections. All right. But the key here is that you would have transfers, and the PDP candidate, the leader, has made reference to this about transferring $10,000 to each constituency. I think that's a brilliant idea, but you have to have a structure, all right, to deal with that funding. All right. So at the level of the administration of the THA, what I am suggesting is below the chief administrator, you have overseeing the work in these two development regions, administrators or regional administrators. All right. So because you have to execute these projects. So you have regional administrators, and below those two regional administrators, you have the other administrators, you have divisions and so on. So you take, as Watson is suggesting, half of the development budget and you transfer. Remember I said in my opening salvo, participation is about the transfer of decision-making authority and the resources. I'm staying true to my thesis. You transfer that. So you have a structure now where the village councils are empowered to make executive decisions about programs and projects. You have the structure, all right? And now you transfer resources to the village councils within these regions, okay, to look after basic things like garbage collection, paving of roads, building of drains. You're not creating a new structure for administration. That is already in place in the THA, all right? What you're creating a structure where you can transfer resources and decision-making authority from divisions, all right, that control those tightly under a secretary, to the regional councils and to the villages. That is my simple suggestion for a model.
All right, great. We'll explore that in some more details as we go along, if time permits. I'm seeing two participants in the meeting with their hands up. Brendan Gray, we'll probably take him. Could the host unmute Brendan so he can ask?
Hello. You hear me?
Question, please.
Hello.
Yes, Brendan.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
yes,
me?
Thanks for joining us. You can go ahead with your question. Yes, we are hearing you.
First of all, let me congratulate CivilNet on putting on this program. I think it's valuable, and I think it will grow as we go along. So let's keep this whole issue going forward, and let's keep this. It will grow. That's what I want to say. First, that's one. Two, I think that Dr. Thompson is onto a very important analogy of what is needed. But I think before that, what we need is for us to do that, what he is recommending or advocating. We need to have our autonomy or rights, or right to do what he's suggesting, the right to do that. So the right to form a government of our own, the right to form an economy of our own, and the right to deal with the culture and the community as we feel like. Because that is exactly what my thought is about the governance structure that is needed. It must start from the community. It cannot start from a THE that is in Scarborough, just like we cannot have governance from Port of Spain, a cabinet that runs Tobago. So we need to put some of that control that he's saying into the community. and the community will deal with it based on the transfer of certain rights, same as we asking for the rights to do our own in terms of our autonomy. So I take his analogy and I take his thesis and agree with where he's going. But I think we must go first to the real point of gaining our rights, where we can determine how that structure, those structures that he's alluding to, can be created.
So, Mr. Gray.
Thank you for allowing me.
Mr. Gray.
So thank you for allowing me.
All right, good. Could anyone tell me where is the rights of Tobagonian to do what we need to do, or who has the rights of Tobagonian and where they are holding it to do what is necessary to fix the island? Could anyone tell me who has the right? Who has our rights? Where are they vested? Where are they being kept in safe? Who's securing them? Who's our right to do these things?
Mr. Pigot wants to get into the conversation.
Mr. Pigot, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. And this is a great discussion, a lot of brilliant minds. I'm going to be brief. I hear the comments by Dr. Thompson and the others, very, very wonderful. But I also want to bring it down to where Brother Anthony James was trying to go, making it interpersonal, the personal to the interpersonal, how we are dealing with each other. That's where it has to start. The integrity has to start with our one-on-one dealings with each other. So when I'm at the gas station waiting in line, and the car in front of me, that the line I'm in, starts to pull out, and somebody in another line altogether sneaks in and zips in front of that car, that's corruption. That is total disrespect of your fellow Tobagonian. When I'm standing in line at Penny Savers, and there's one customer in front of me, and another customer comes and give them their groceries and their money, and then thinks it's still one customer. No, it's two customers, because the customer has to pay with her money and then pay with the money you just gave her. That's corruption. And when no one bats an eye at that, when no one says, hey, wait a minute, that's not how we're supposed to function here, then that person, that kind of attitude, that lack of integrity is what goes up into the THA, is what goes up into the big house, right? Because our government comes out of the people, right? They don't drop in from the sky. So if your society has a lack of integrity and our interpersonal connections, we're cussing each other out. You can't even correct anybody these days. They're ready to cuss you out. So and then you see it in our prime minister. You see the connection, right? The way we deal with each other interpersonally is how our prime minister deals with us when we disagree with him. We're imps, pimps, and chimps. You see, and we are has-been politicians because we didn't win the office. So we cannot deal with each other like this and then expect good governance. So it starts at the interpersonal level, how we're dealing with each other. That's the comments I want to make on that issue.
Yeah, and you're very right, Brother Pigot. We know that the temperature or the characteristics of an organization is informed by the personality and attitude of the leaders. And we do have a problem of leadership in this country, and to marry that with the fact that our primary institutions of socialization that sets up social control, the family, community-based organization like churches and so forth, have all but, I don't want to say collapse, but are under severe stress. And therefore, we have a serious issue in terms of honesty and how we socialize people in this society. And that's a whole program that we need to treat it in itself. But you are right that the interpersonal issues, and if we set up the framework for participation, it will also guide how we interact with each other over time. And if we move through organized people and institutions, we have a faster turnover in terms of the bad attitude that we are seeking to correct. So let me go back to Dr. Remy. Based on the suggestion that came or the contribution from Brother Gray and Brother Pigot, if there's anything.
I thought we were getting Shirley Cook to get in, because I don't know that she is.
I'm not seeing her hands anymore, so I don't know. And
I know she said she needed to be unmuted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let me see if she's still there. Sister Shirley, are you still there? Sister Cook, are you still there? I'm not seeing any. I'm seeing, where is Brittany?
I'm
Yeah,
right
that's
here.
I'm not seeing you. Oh, okay.
Okay, she said no.
Yeah,
They said no.
well, let me get a comment from Brittany based on what
Yes, thank you.
I've-
So,
I've-
yes, I haven't had a
I haven't
chance
seen it
for a
for a
while.
while. I
See
thought
me?
you have left the meeting.
Really? You didn't call me?
I'm not seeing you.
But here's what I want to consider as well when we talk about transformation and what kind of strategies we can consider for Tobago. We can still have the conversation about digital transformation for Tobago, which is necessary and needed as we move forward out of this whole pandemic. Because I realize as we talk about governance and people participation, we should set up the framework as to what is the context that we have to deal with now. And as it stands the last 2 years, we have had to deal with an ongoing pandemic that has caused so much impact worldwide and definitely has felt it here. So when you think about it, what kind of infrastructure or what kind of methodologies can we put in place if we digitally transform our island? So that makes me think about one time about digital sovereignty. Can our institutions now realize that, hey, and I know that a lot of our organizations are interconnected because they all have platforms now where persons can access the information. Can we make sure that this actually is organized better so that you know that if it is that you want to participate, you can check on this information to make sure that it's valid and to see what is happening and to continue to keep people transparent, keep actions accountable, and just make sure that we have that good participation that we want to be talking about. And I think that with having that level of transformation, and it's very easy to do because I'm sure even in this platform right here, we are using the technologies to have this conversation. So I'm very certain that we can continue to have this discussion about it.
Yeah, thank you. Let me ask this question, and I'll probably want to get the feedback from the panelists on this. Could we realize effective people participation in a context where we have a failing education system and the role in education as it impacts good governance? Because when we look at what is happening with education in Tobago and the need for effective people's participation, you need a very informed and alert and discerning society. And if you have the masses is failing in the education system, how do we reconcile those two issues? Alvin?
Let me just make a short comment on what Rodney and Anselm was talking about in terms of values. I think it's a very, very important point. It's overlooked many a times, but we can't assume that we make decisions that aren't value laden. Every time we make a decision, there are a set of values coming behind that decision. All right. And what you see now, all right, is a reflection of where Tobago or what Tobago has evolved to in terms of its values. When I and you were growing up, Anselm and Anthony, Tobago wasn't like that. All right. And I suspect that Rodney may have lived outside of Tobago for some time. I live in Canada. All right. And people cutting lines in front of me is not something that happens, right? People behave in a particular way. I remember one time before I started driving myself, I'd go to the bus stop, people wouldn't stand in a line. When the bus comes, people instinctively knew who was there first and nobody rushed to the door. All right. People just went into the bus. I said, but what is this? All right. And one time I experienced a blackout while I was driving and I got to a 4 roads. And this is amazing. People would drive up to their line, stop, know who came before them. There was not a policeman in sight and the traffic did not stop. I mean, this is not fantasy. This is what I experienced this. So this points to what Rodney was talking about values, but that is something that I don't know whether we could recapture that or not. But just using that to jump off on the point you made about education, I think, I don't know if the education you're talking about is passing 5 subjects or education about a level of consciousness about how, as a society,
you are fully aware of my definition of
we
education.
make decisions collectively, because remember, governance and institutional choice is about collective decisions.
Yes.
Right? What Anselm does when he gets up in the morning isn't about him. That has been conditioned in him, what Dr. Remy does. So we have this idea sometimes that we make decisions, all right, that are abstracted from what happens around us. But that doesn't happen, and that's why I say when people say, I met the picnic boy, I met the mind, that is such a false statement. You know, as a society, we are a product of our value systems. We can't escape that. And we make decisions collectively based on those values. Now, I don't know how we are going to fix that in the education system. I don't know.
Well, we need to do something about the education system in Tobago. And Dr. Remy, what's your take?
Yes, we need to do something about the education system in Tobago. And I would agree, particularly at the level of starting from foundation. And I would agree that education is not what we do right now in terms of cramming children to pass C, failing them at C, and then going on to CXC and A levels and cramming through things. That's not education. So yes, I agree, we have to have a whole reformation of what we are doing now in terms of our systems, of how we educate, how we get from the children what is already intrinsically in them in terms of their ability to think and stuff like that, and how we help them to do that and to be able to navigate their world is something that we need to do. And also in the, you talk about, Alvin, you're saying you don't know as to how we will be able to change the things. We can change it at the level of education, because this is where they spend a lot of their time. And if we put into that system, as we are doing in some of our schools in Tobago now, we can help to change the process. But it has to be more than just the children. It has to be also the adults in terms of the changes that are occurring in terms of those values. So yes, Anselm, it has to be, and it is not an easy thing, but it has to be done. The other thing I would mention though is that the getting away from the education being the 5 subjects and cramming children and passing and getting a lot of degrees and stuff like that, is that we know many of our people be fine. Like my father, he was in a primary school, very well educated, a thinker, a reader, a scholar, but never had the stuff to back it up in terms of what we consider now as education. So we also need that also in our people, thinking people who will be able to, and actually go on the block. Many of them, there are many thinkers inside there doing all sorts of stuff inside there, but just for the wrong reasons. They're using their creativity and stuff like that they have, but for the wrong reasons. So we have to harness and think of what we are doing in terms of educating or people in a different way.
Well, we may have to look at education way beyond the formal education system and the Edwardian education system that we inherited from the colonial powers, and create an education system, because there will be a need for us to re-educate some of those persons who the formal system would have failed, and give them the opportunity to be like your father, Dr. Remy, without the certification. So we make the great distinction between education and certification. And we move from the educated to the brilliant Tobagonians that we have known them to be over the years. Like my father, I've never worked for the government and was one of the most shrewd businessmen Tobago I've ever seen. But we go to Anthony at this point and get his comment. I know that he comes from a very widely educated family who has contributed significantly to education in Trinidad and Tobago. So Anthony, I give you that.
Yeah. Again, listening, what is crying out is really leadership. You see, because a society has to be led. A civilization has to be led. A society has to be built. A civilization has to be built. Where there is no vision, people will perish. The reason why we are making these statements here and crying out for a true definition of education is because residing in each of us here is a vision. So this program is good. The symbol of all of us pulling Tobago together is good. But we have to be robust and to be rampant. And we have to be louder. And we have to be more than the negative voices, the voices that are selfish, the agendas that are selfish. We need people of understanding and, as I said before, the moral and spiritual values with vision to take over the reins of the society. We need a good captain. We need a good leader. Dr. Anselm Richards.
We have a question from a participant here, Brother Patrick George, and he's asking, and probably Brittany and Alvin will come in on this. The question is, and this is his question, the question is, how do we get any administration to implement any of these wonderful ideas? And probably we could start about the vision and the leadership. Brother Anthony will talk about what I leave that to brother and to sister Brittany and brother Alvin to flush out some response to brother George's question. Brittany?
Thank you, because I wasn't sure who was going to take it first. But even on the question, because I have two things that I really want to address first, because, and Mr. George, we will get to your question as well. But first, when you spoke about our education system is failing, how are we defining it as a failure? Because for me, I want to see the opportunities that can now be provided because of how we have to think differently. So while we are seeing that not everyone can have a traditional education, we can provide, and I think that is very important, that as a Tobago society, we can provide opportunities for those who might not have been able to access it in the traditional way to have alternative ways so that they can have an economic contribution to give to our society. Those are the type of conversations we need to have as well, because
that is exactly the failure we are talking about, because we are focusing on the traditional education and there's no opportunity for other pathways. So we are confined with certification and 5 subjects and all of that.
Right.
The point you are making. So the system is failing across the board. It is failing both that the children are not even achieving the 5 subjects, including maths and English, because we are under 40%. And any system that is operating under 70% is a failure by any measure. But we are saying, just a minute, but we are saying, alongside of the formal system, we need to create other pathways for that those persons have opportunities to improve their ability to contribute to the development of their families, themselves, and their society.
So what I would also see it as we need more innovation, because we know stories of Jeff Bezos, of Mark Zuckerberg, of all these different persons who are actually dropouts, who would have failed in the traditional educational system, but they had the vision. And I like how, I think it was my colleague here on the panel, when he spoke about vision and having an idea of how you want to carry yourself forward. So if they can see that it does not matter if it is that they don't have a traditional route, but they can have an idea and they want to harness this idea and to be able to make it as a vision to see how you can carry Tobago forward, I think that is something that we need to definitely introduce as well. Innovation is needed. We are all talking about entrepreneurship. I am certain that there are a lot of young people who would have started businesses coming out of this pandemic because they realize that, hey, I need to be able to fend for myself, or I need to be able to support my family. And they would have had to use the simple skills that they would have learned in school to be able to build on it and to be able to thrive. Because you don't necessarily need a formal form of education to be a businessman. We have enough stories of persons in the past. I'm sure my grandfather, if he was alive, would say on it that they might not have had that formal education, but they were able to know how to run a business and have a successful business. And we have enough stories of those successful stories who would have been there before. But now let's look at what Mr. Patrick George is saying, because he's asking about, the question is, how do we get any administration to implement any of these wonderful ideas? This is why we have to hold them accountable. This is why we need to continue having a conversation with them. This is why we have to participate and say, this is what I want to see. And if this is not what I'm getting, how do we make sure that this is what is happening? I do not think that we should just vote them in and leave them there. There have to be other measures that we can introduce as well to be like, hey, this is what I want to see, because you would have introduced these amazing promises, or you would have said about these, a lot of these really grandiose ideas at the beginning of the campaign period. But what about the first 90 days? What are your action plans to make sure that you can actually implement this? And what about the mid-year? What about the second year half? What about the third years, to make sure that you have reviews? And this is why I think a lot of the persons that we elect, they have started this trend of highlighting what they were able to accomplish, so that you could be like, okay, have you met your targets? Because we need to make sure that you are transparent and accountable.
All right, thank you, Whitney. We have 5 minutes to the end of the program, and I want to give each panelist an opportunity to bring their closing contribution. But Alvin, could you probably indicate to us and our participants how we can get the system to start changing, as Brother George is asking? What are some of the things we can do, and
So
whether it need?
I sense a bit of frustration in Mr. George's question, and I don't know. I have the answer for him, but let me say this. Perhaps when we have fora like these with 3,000 people looking at us, that it would give us the sense that enough people in Tobago are concerned about these issues, all right, so we can come together and have these discussions and have the vast number of us massaging these issues. And then perhaps we know, yeah, maybe when a forum like this attracts the same amount of people like as a FET, maybe at that point
political meeting.
Maybe at that point in time, you know, yes, the people are ready for change. I don't know the answer to Mr. George's question. I don't know. Okay. Perhaps I should do my closing comment. Here. Yeah. I mean, I'm really grateful for the invitation from CivilNet. I think as frustrating as these discussions may seem sometimes, we have to continue to have them. We have to continue to talk about these issues in a passionate way, and sometimes dispassionate way, because if we don't, then I think we are heading down a road. And my fear as a Tobagonian is that if we are coming very close to a tipping point, maybe a point where if we tip a little bit too far, that we may be tipping over to something that we can't recover from.
Okay, that's very interesting, Alvin. Dr. Remy?
We have to continue the discussion, Anselm. I am not of the view that we are near any tipping point. I am of the view that I'm of the view that we are in a stage where we are ripe for moving forward. I really do think that this pandemic and what has happened and what it has exposed and all the things that we see that are wrong and what the things that how we could have done differently, etc., I think is a wonderful opportunity for us to make a new start. And I really do think, Alvin, that the issue of getting our bills where we will be having an opportunity to make our own decisions is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be, all the fancy talk that we are talking right now is not, we will not be even able to see it. If we get autonomy tomorrow, Ansel, if we get the bill passed tomorrow and in the form that all Tobagonians wanted, it's still going to be a process. So I'm not ready to give up. We will have to continue trying. And as long as we continue to try, knowing that we are looking at Tobago, knowing that we are looking at our people, knowing that we are looking at the generations to come, we just have to continue to try and do it. And I'm confident that we will.
Anthony, thank you, Dr. Remy, for those closing remarks. Anthony.
We would be doing ourselves a grave injustice if we should abandon our responsibility, if we should abdicate our own right to self-pity, our own God-given constitution in the way God constitutes us to be sovereign, responsible for ourselves, responsible for our own possession. To think that we are not possessors of Tobago is to think that we are slaves. And that in itself is a great irresponsibility, to conceive of ourselves as slaves in Tobago. Because the word Tobagonian is a possessive pronoun. It means that we possess Tobago and Tobago is ours. And it is our sole prerogative and responsibility to govern the entirety of Tobago, to govern and to chart Tobagonian lives. I know it may seem frustrating. All the grandiose plans that we talk about tonight,
we need to take
cannot be attained without
Tobago taking full control
that,
of its people and its island.
So well, I prefer to call Tobago our country and not
our country.
I prefer to call Tobago our country. I prefer to refer to the people of Tobago as my nation, right? Because what is happening here, we have found ourselves defining ourselves by historical corruption. The joining of Tobago and Trinidad together. When Trinidadians vote, they form a government of Trinidad and Tobago, and we have accepted that and calling Trinidad national, calling ourselves on the island. One of the most dangerous language in Tobago is calling ourselves on the island. That's for people who have actually lost themselves. I am not on an island. I'm in my country. And I don't need a law in Trinidad or wherever to tell me that. We must know that from ourselves, that Tobago is ours and our story is ours. As Dr. Winston Murray said, if we fail to recognize that and to do or to fulfill this generational responsibility, he said we are made of the poorest stuff.
Okay, thank you, Brother Anthony. We feel your passion and we know that the flame will never go out once you are alive. Go ahead, Sister Whitney.
Brittany, not Whitney.
Brittany.
What I would say, I want to remain positive. I want to remain hopeful because I see Tobago and the future of Tobago, that we are full of opportunity and we are reaping and we want to be able to reap those benefits, because it's not just for me, it's for my children, Tobago's children, even their grandchildren, and to ensure that the actions that we take now ensure that they have a future to consider. So I want us to think about how, even for us now, what the actions and what are the decisions or what are the participatory movements that we make now, how does it impact those to come? Because they would have to inherit our failures. So I want us to think about that. I also want us to think about how we move this nation and this country and this island forward, and not necessarily just stay in our own corners and thinking, well, I don't live here anymore, so I don't have to deal with that, because we all have a collective part to play in ensuring that Tobago develops. And that's why the motto says, Pulcheria Ebony. And if my Latin is rusty, I'm sorry, because she becomes more beautiful. This is our home. So this is why we need to ensure that we protect our home, we save our home, we preserve our home, and making sure that we have something to hand on to the next generation. Thank you.
We live here, we work here, and we are from here.
Yeah, and we want to.
Brothers and sisters, I want to thank you, and I think I can close by saying that we had agreement or consensus on the fact that there's definitely a need for us to look at the constitutional arrangement that will deepen our self-determination, and that will create the structures and the institutional arrangement that will provide for greater citizen participation in decision making and the transfer of power back to the communities and back to where decision really impacts the life of individual. We are not in the business of giving up our right to decision making exclusively to our elected representative. We also recognize that there's a need for some kind of tweaking and updating and modernization of our education system away from the traditional system where we confuse certification with education and create a vast array of opportunities for all to survive and acquire the necessary skill in their chosen field. We agreed also that we need to look at the integrity and honesty of the persons we elect. And we agree in the conversation, there seems to be consensus on the fact that we need to continue this discussion. We need to expand the tent. We need to get more Tobagonians to become more aware and more conscious and informed of their roles and responsibility as citizens of this nation that is called Tobago. And I take that from my brother Anthony. this nation that is called Tobago. And it's when we are at that point and we have a critical mass of Tobagonians that are conscious and alert and awake to their responsibilities, that will be able to effect the kind of transformative changes that are necessary to take Tobago to the rightful place that it ought to have been some decades ago. So I want to thank you. This has been a production of Tobago CivilNet, a non-political organization that is designed and intend to mobilize and organize Tobagonians and make them more aware and conscious and alive to their social responsibility as we move to pull Tobago up together. I want to thank you for having us. I want to thank the organizers. I want to thank all the participants, both on social media and those who are with us in the chat room. Thank you for being with us and for spending the last hour and a half with us. May you have a restful rest of the week and weekend, and may the God that we worship and serve look over all of us as we depart from each other, whether virtually or in person. Have a blessed night. Be safe.
Good night. Night, everyone.
Have a